In this video, I am going to talk about the S160 Class 280 steam locomotives built between 1942 and 1945. This is a very important class of steam locomotive as it was highly successful and was used all over the world during World War II and beyond. In the 1930s, the U.S. Army decided to update the Baldwin World War I design. The plan was to have a more powerful and more efficient steam locomotive to replace the aging World War I class. The result was the S159 class. At the beginning of World War II, the U.S. was still neutral at that time, and an agreement was made to send several S200 class locomotives to Great Britain using the Lend-Lease Act. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was very keen to help the British fight against the Nazis, so the U.S. sent millions of supplies to the UK during this time, including railway equipment. With the U.S. entering the war, the Army needed a locomotive developed that could navigate through the rough railways in Europe as a result of the war. This need led to the development of the S160 class. These were designed to be built very quickly and designed to be long-lasting. These engines used axle box grease lubricators and rolled plates instead of castings. These locomotives also used cast frames. A few had frames cut from rolled steel. They also had cast wheels, and the two front drive wheels and axles were separately sprung from the two rear driving wheels, and the axles to better navigate through the rough tracks of wartime Europe. In total, 2,120 of these engines would be built. In 1942 and 1943, 800 locomotives were built in 13 groups. Alco, Baldwin, and the Lima Locomotive Works were contracted to build them. These units were sent to South Wales and then onto the Great Western Railway, and the first 43 engines were transferred to the London and North Eastern Railways, Doncaster Works, for final assembly. They later ran on the East Coast Main Line. In the end, 4 British railway companies deployed 400 S160s to replace damaged locomotives and raise the capacity of the British railway system to ship increased amounts of military hardware for the invasion preparations. The next group of 400 S160s were stored by ASATC workers at the Great Western's Ebb Junction Depot to be ready for the D-Day invasion. After Normandy, the locomotives currently in Great Britain were rebuilt at the Ebb Junction to be sent to Europe to continue the war effort. After Normandy, these locomotives were spread all over the continent of Europe. These locomotives performed well as a whole, but unfortunately there were accidents. The class was designed for fast building, and unfortunately this led to some issues that caused failures. The axle box grease lubricators did not work well, especially in fast-moving wartime operations when maintenance was not always up to par. This caused the axles to get hot on many locomotives. Braking was also an issue. The Westinghouse steam brake system was underpowered for long distances from the engineer's valve to the brake cylinder. The biggest issues with this class was only one water glass of a Klinger design was used, and the UK crews were not very familiar with this system. They were also known to trap water in the gauge when not operated properly, causing false readings, and would make the engines run dangerously low on water. In a 10-month span, 3 S160s operating in the UK suffered failures of the crown sheet due to low water. The first caused the death of a Great Western fireman on number 2403 in 1943 November. While the S160s were being sent to Europe, General Patton was in command of troops in Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa, and several S160s were brought with him. The engines were moved along the north of the continent as Patton's army fought, and when they made it to Italy, the S160s were moved up also. These S160s, joined by a group imported directly from the U.S., were combined to create a group of 243 steamers taken over by the Italian state railways to create the S160 Class. An unknown number of S160s were used in the United States for military transport and the Alaska Railroad. They were later shipped to Spain. China received several of the S160 class, and they were redesignated as the KD6 class. They received larger cabs and higher stacks, and they were sent to run in industrial operations, mostly coal mines. China was the last country to use S160s in commercial freight service, and they were withdrawn from service in the late 1990s to be replaced by newer, more powerful SY Class 282s. Two still survive in China, numbers 463 and 487. In the end, these engines were used in countries all over the world, including many not mentioned in this video, like Mexico, Peru, North and South Korea, India, and the USSR. Many examples of the class still exist around the world, and I am going to talk about some of them now. First is number 1702, built in 1942 by Baldwin, and like the others, she ran for the U.S. Army to start out, and later she was run in Arkansas and Nebraska before being purchased by the Great Smoky Mountains Railroad in 1991 and restored to operation. Number 1702 is one of 26 S160s preserved in the U.S. and was modified to look more like a traditional US 280. Her stack and dome were raised, and a center mount smoke box door and headlight were installed. She also received an upper smoke box door bell. She was also converted to burn oil instead of coal, and she still runs today. I first saw her run in 1997 and have seen her run several times since then. Next is number 2630. She operated for the U.S. Army for years until being retired. She eventually ended up at the Cass Scenic Railroad to be evaluated for restoration and possible operation on the Durban line. I saw her several times on a siding in Cass in very rough condition. In the end, the idea of operating her was dropped, and she was sold to the Age of Steam Roundhouse, where she was completely cosmetically rebuilt and painted army green. She looks absolutely stunning now, and though she does not run, she is being beautifully preserved. Next is S160 number 610, and like the others, she was built for the U.S. Army. She is now at the Tennessee Valley Railroad and was operating until 2010 when she needed her federally mandated 1472-day inspection. She may be restored and operated again someday, but that remains to be seen. When TVRM restored her to operation, several cosmetic changes were made to make her look more like a traditional US 280, like Great Smoky Mountains did with 1702. Her stack and domes were raised, and an American-style cab was built and installed. A center mount headlight was installed along with a new smoke box door, with the door in the middle instead of being offset. Number 610 is an interesting locomotive, and she is the last locomotive built for commercial service in the United States. She was built by Baldwin Lima Hamilton Corporation, and while she was built in 1952, she is a S160 Class. Number 610 is one of my favorite standard gauge steam locomotives and my favorite of the S160 Class, and was the very first steam locomotive that I rode in the cab of back in 2002. There are many other S160 Class engines in the country also that are on display, but I have yet to see any of them. The most notable of late is number 3523, later Alaska Railroad number 557. She is currently being rebuilt to operational status. Ironically, there are more of these engines operating in Great Britain today than in the country that designed and built them. There's so much more I could say about this amazing and versatile class of steam locomotive, but this was just a brief history of the class. In the end, these locomotives ended up with such a variety of looks, colors, coupler types, and cosmetic differences. Many people consider these engines to be ugly. However, I find them to be interesting and handsome. And in the end, these amazing veteran machines helped to win a war and defeat Nazi tyranny. The visual media used in this video was all videos, pictures, simulations, slides, and postcards taken or owned by me.